Welcome back, Leggari Nation. Today we are showing you how we took this custom wood bar and made it look like real concrete. We are showing you every step of the way with everything explained. After watching this, you'll have all the knowledge to install this yourself. For more info, check the description below.
So we're basically ready to prime. I want to kind of go through what they did to get these tops to this point. We didn't do it, but they did an amazing job. They basically framed it out like they would a typical kitchen counter, and instead of doing granite, formica, whatever counter you were going to do, they just built it out of MDF. So as you can see, we have a sheet of MDF on the top, MDF on the faces, and then obviously you can tell they've filled all the seams, nail holes, screw holes, sanded them flush. They've even rounded the corners. You really want to be going over rounded edges. You don't want to go over square edges that are more prone to chipping, stuff like that. So always round your corners a little bit. We're going to be coating basically everything that you see. So when we're done, this is going to look like a solid one-piece slab of poured concrete. It's going to look absolutely beautiful. And then after that, you can come around here, all the seams in the back, they just did a paintable latex caulking. Our primers are gonna bond to that. That's gonna give us some flex in those seams. By the time we're coating, it's all gonna look seamless. And just notice, everywhere there's a seam, anywhere a patcher could fill it, they filled it. Low spots, right? Anything like that. And then you just wanna make sure you've sanded them smooth. So I can't feel a lip on any of these after you sand it. So you always wanna double check that. We're also doing they're doing undermount sinks. So they've even filled in this edge after cutting it, so it's nice and smooth. So by the time we're coating this, it's gonna look perfect. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So they built it, they prepped it, and then we just came in and wiped it down with water and a rag to get any residue, any dust off. So now it's pretty much ready for the primer. Notice everything's taped off. Anything that we don't wanna get primer or overlay on has tape on it. The floor's masked off. And then a few things, we'll come around to this side over here. I want to point out, when you guys are taping on a finished edge, you always want to tape high. So you don't want to tape right to the bottom of the counter. Notice we tape high, that way when we're done coating, we can pull that tape and it's not going to be locked in with the coating. So always tape high on any spots that are going to be finished. If you were going to do tile here or a backsplash, you could just cut the tape, pull it out, doesn't matter. You could go right over the tape with your tile or backsplash. So that's pretty much it. We'll get started. We'll start mixing the primer. We'll show you guys that, and then we'll start the process of turning this wood countertop into concrete. And keep in mind, you can do the concrete overlay over any surface. So it doesn't have to be wood. You can go over your formica, granite, tile, all that stuff. Just depends on, sometimes different surfaces, you'll have different prep. You might have to do some different prep stuff, but this is just built over wood and we're gonna turn it into concrete.
For this project, we're gonna be doing 6 Leggari concrete overlay countertop kits. So this is actually kit number 7. It doesn't have a stain color with it because we wanna go with a very rustic, kind of modern looking concrete countertop. It's very seamless, very plain, but very elegant. So let me I want to do an unboxing of what one kit looks like. Now again, we're going to be doing 6 here, but depending on how many kits you've ordered, maybe you've ordered 1, 2, 3, just make sure all the contents are in there. So I'll pull everything out and then I'll kind of explain what you want to see when you unbox your concrete overlay countertop kit. Okay, so we have step 1, liquid polymer. And with that step 1 liquid polymer, you need a step 1 texture coat. And then you'll need a step 2 liquid polymer and a step 2 of the texture coat. Then you'll want to make sure you have a step 3 liquid polymer and a step 3 of the scratch coat. So this is essentially, obviously, the steps. And then you want to make sure you have the countertop primer, A and B. You'll do this before these. You'll see that in a minute. Now, you have to have a top coat with the concrete overlay countertop kit. So they've opted for a matte top coat. So with this, you're gonna have, for one kit, you're gonna have 2 urethanes. If you do get one, it's because we've added double the amount in one. So for this particular kit, we have 2 urethanes. And of course the mat, part A and part B. And then possibly using the grit additive. If you have the grit additive, that'll also come with the urethane. So this is essentially what you wanna have when you open up your boxes. You wanna have a primer, you wanna have step 1, texture coat and polymer, step 2, and step 3 with the scratch coat, and then your top coat, and then obviously your grit additive if you ordered that or opted to have that. Now, if you chose any of the kits that are not kit number 7, which is just the standard kit, if you have a color coming, you will also have a sprayer with a stain. So that'll be an additional thing that you'll receive in your kit as well if you did any other kit besides kit 7. So that's about it. Now we're gonna mix up the primer and get going on this project. Okay, now we're gonna mix up the primer. Now we have 6 kits. We're gonna start with 4 primers because the primer does go a little bit farther or sometimes even less on certain substrates. So we're not exactly sure how much we'll use, but we'll start out with 4 of these at a time. So the first thing you wanna do is take the part A of the primer and just mix them up. Just shake them, make sure the lids are on tight. Now mixing is the same regardless of how many kits you have. Obviously, if you're just mixing one kit, you don't need to pour multiple things in there. You're just gonna use a smaller container. You're gonna shake up the part A, and then you're gonna pour the part B into that, and then you could even mix it by hand. Now, when I look at the bottom, I see some of the product that's actually settled, so I just scooped up a little bit more just to make sure we clean that out. I'll check the other ones too. You wanna make sure that there's nothing sitting in the bottom of the part A container, and sometimes if you don't shake it good enough, it won't get mixed up. So I'll check the other ones. Just put a little bit of liquid in there, and you can take a paint stick and just stir it up a little bit, get everything off the bottom of that container. That's definitely key. That's part of the magic of the primer. Just going to mix this a little bit in the container, just to re-emulsify everything that was in the bottom of those containers. Now with the part B is really thick, really sticky, so we're just gonna scoop that out. All right, now you can actually mix this by hand. It does mix really easy. I'm just gonna mix this by hand because it mixes really easily. I have a drill here in case I wanted to use it, but I don't want to use it because it's just mixing so fast. So you want to mix it really well, scraping the bottom, scraping the sides of the mixing container, probably for a couple minutes. All right, primer's mixed up. Get this to Tyler. He'll show you how to apply it.
So Tim's got me the primer ready, and I'll just kind of go over a few things. The primer, if you're gonna prime, you wanna make sure you do the overlay over that within about 2 hours. You don't wanna wait past that. We typically will prime, put a fan on it, and we can usually coat over that within about an hour. But make sure you're not waiting longer than 2 hours or that primer is gonna be too hard, and you're not gonna get a great bond on that. So just keep that in mind. The next thing is we're gonna be using a roller tray, and since this is such a large area, we're gonna be using a 9-inch roller, 3/8 nap. It's already been de-shedded. Make sure you run tape on that, get any loose hairs off. And I'm just gonna dip and roll. Tim's gonna take a paintbrush once I pour this out and start hitting all the edges that my roller's not gonna hit. And this is made to go on thin, so we want to roll it on thin. Obviously the wood's going to soak it up. It's going to go farther if you guys are coating maybe say Formica or something that's not porous like wood. It's going to go a lot farther, so just keep that in mind. It's going to be white when I roll it, and then when it's dry, it's going to go clear.
So like Tyler mentioned, the biggest thing I want to do is I want to be in front of him, and I just want to get out of his way. So I'm just going to hit all the corners, and I'm going to try to bring it out maybe about an inch or two, just to give him plenty of space to work with so he doesn't have to get that roller close to the wall. I'm going to hit all the awkward places for a big roller. And you don't want a lot of puddles, like he was mentioning. It's going to go on thin, so I'm just trying to work out all the puddles. And now I'm pretty much done. We are going to do this wall down here. Same thing, I'm going to hit all the places that are going to be a pain in the butt for that roller.
So once Tim's got edges done, I can start rolling this stuff out everywhere. Very forgiving primer, really easy. I just want to roll this out until it's not really thick, but again, this wood's going to want to soak this up quite a bit. Notice I'm really working that into the wood. So once I dip, I'll kind of roll a bead down the middle, and then I'll kind of cross roll that out. So get a section done on the top, and then I like to hit my edges after I've kind of rolled it off the roller. That way I don't have so much product on the roller. And then just looking for any thick spots, roll those out. Now, if you guys want, you can get under the sinks and roll back under those sinks as well to kind of seal up that wood. Obviously, these are going to be under mount, so there's going to be some caulking, silicone caulking there to seal that, but it is a good idea to run that roller, seal up that bottom edge of the wood. All right, on these big vertical faces, I'm just going to put this on a pole instead of having to bend over and hit them by hand. So it'll be a little bit easier. Just kind of like painting the wall. So you can see already dried out, it's tacky. So this would be the perfect time to go on. Obviously we have some more white spots up here that are still drying out. Once it all goes clear, we can apply that first coat of the overlay. Just want to make sure, again, like I said before, we're not going past like 2 hours. Make sure you get that first coat of the overlay on there within that 2-hour period. All right, guys, there you have it. That's how you prime. So again, we'll wait till all this white goes away, it goes completely clear, and then we'll show you how to mix up the first coat of the concrete overlay. We'll show you guys that next.
So as you can see, I'm outside right now. Now, it may be a little bit noisier, but I think it's important that we actually mix in an environment that we recommend mixing in. So we like to mix the concrete overlay up outside. There is a little bit of dust. If you have to do it inside or inside a garage, just put a shop vac towards the top of the bucket. And that way when you're pouring in the powder, it'll just pick up the residual dust. So what we're going to do is mix up 2 kits. Remember, we have 6 countertop kits. So we have 6 step 1s. Now you can fit 3 in a 5-gallon bucket. We're gonna start out with 2 because that's just a little more manageable right now. We're gonna see how far that goes, and then we'll probably mix up on the second batch 3 more of those, which will leave us with 1 left in case we need that. So again, we recommend mixing maybe a couple at a time if you have a very large countertop and you have multiple kits like this. Again, we have 6. We're just gonna start with 2 step 1s for now. So the process is you wanna agitate and shake up the step 1 a little bit, make sure the lid's on. It's really easy to work on a table as well, but we're not doing that. We're gonna pour the liquid polymer in the bucket. And really the trick, guys, and make sure there's nothing stuck in this handle here, but the trick is just having the drill spinning a little bit while you're adding the powder. If you can't, that's fine, it's not the end of the world. But we're gonna mix with an electric drill with the paddle wheel. So we'll just break open these step 1s. And now when you receive your kit, the bags that the overlay come in may have changed, but that's fine. They're still gonna say step 1 or step 2, step 3 on them. So none of that's going to change. I'm just gonna open these bags up. And now they're not very heavy, they're about 14 pounds. So I'm just gonna hold on to it. It's easy if you have somebody help you, but I'm just gonna add it. Just add it slowly. Make sure you have everything out of that bag. Get the other one in there. You just want to make sure that you have all of the powder out of the bag. Now we're just going to mix this for a couple minutes and make sure everything is mixed thoroughly. So what I'm looking for is kind of like a runny pancake type mixture. You can kind of see it. This is great, this is perfect. That's what we're going for. You don't want any chunks. You want to make sure there are no chunks in it. If you start using it and you find that there's chunks, put it back in the bucket, mix it up a little bit more. Make sure there's no chunks. All right, now this mix is ready to go. We'll grab a bucket here with some water in it. We'll rinse off the paddle, and this is ready to use.
Now that Tim has the mix ready, what we're gonna do first is, the most annoying part is we're gonna just do one coat underneath this bar. That way if someone feels under there, looks under there, it looks like solid slab of concrete. They won't be able to tell that it's coated over wood. So we're gonna do this part first. It is gonna be a little messy since we're coating, right, an undermount or an overhang bottom edge, so it's gonna wanna drip. But what I'm gonna do, same way we do walls, when we use our overlay to do walls, I'm gonna dip, get the product on the roller, and then I'm gonna roll it under here. I'm gonna get the majority of it on there, and then once it starts to set up a little, we're gonna take the squeegee and we're just gonna flatten that off. And then once we get this done, we're gonna do this face, vertical surfaces right here, get all those done, and then we're gonna just finish out the top. Tops are obviously easy, edges are easy. Doing the vertical and overhang undermounts are a little bit more difficult, but you'll kind of see how it goes. So to minimize us stepping in all the drips, we're gonna just roll a sheet of paper out, another sheet. We'll just tack it down. Once we get this under the counter coated, we'll just pull this up and we'll have a clean area. So once I dip it, I'll kind of spin it up here, and then we'll just start putting that product on there. I'm not pushing hard. If I push hard, it's just gonna squeeze it all off. I'm trying to be really light. Just let it get on there kind of thick. And then if Tim needs more material, he'll just let me know, and I can get him a little bit more wherever he's at. So while Tim's finishing that up, I'm gonna just go take a scraper, scrape out these chunks that got on the wall, because it will dry out relatively quick. And then same thing with this edge. We don't want any lips on this face, so I'm gonna knock these off. So now what we'll do is we'll clean these tools off. We'll pull up that paper so we can get in there without stepping in a bunch of that. And then we'll start doing our vertical face here. This can get thrown away, and then now we can do our vertical face there. And then just be cautious of any drips or stuff you get off the plastic or paper. Wipe those up while they're still fluid. You can just use a rag and water. All right, so now, since we have the bottom edge done, I don't necessarily want to hit that with the roller, or Tim's gonna have to flatten off those spots that hit up underneath here. So I'm gonna try to get as close as I can up to the top there, and then If he needs more, he'll just let me know. But we're gonna do the same exact process. Dip it in the bucket and then put it on the wall. And again, I'm just being really light, not pressing hard, or it's just gonna squeeze it all off onto the floor. And then it's easiest to go from the bottom and pull that material up. So it's always good to have a clean working area because I'm going to be using a lot of that product that's on the floor and pushing that back up the wall. And then if I need more, I'll just let him know. Let Tim know, hey, give me a little more product here. And don't worry about the scratch marks. We're going to get those after primer because it's basically a sealed surface. Once we do our second coat, we won't have any of those scratch marks, so I'm not concerned about those right now. All I'm trying to do is get an even coat on everything. And then once I'm done with the section, I want to just flatten off the excess on the bottom. That way we don't have a bunch of product built up where we're going to be pulling tape. So you notice I pull that back, flatten it off. We don't want a bunch of piles like we have here, right on the bottom. And if you guys are having a tough time getting in a, like maybe for instance this back edge where I'm at, you can get a paintbrush, brush it in there, and then all you got to do is flatten it off. I mean, if we do 2 coats on there, I think it'll be fine.
Which edge?
Up here. So all I'm trying to do is get everything covered in the overlay, and then I'll kind of flatten the wall off and make sure there's no thick spots. I'm not really necessarily trying to make it look pretty right off the bat. Make sure everything's coated to where I can't see the wood. So, like, look, I'm just, once I get done with the section, I'll kind of go back. I know I can flatten this off just a little bit better. Just work it sections at a time. Don't stress out about doing the whole wall at once. Get sections done, finished, cleaned up. And just biggest thing is make sure you're not leaving big chunks at the bottom here. All right, finalize this thing up. Get all that product pulled away. Now we got our vertical edge done here. Just double check, make sure everything looks good, no thick spots. Looks perfect. So now we can, well, we got a spot here. So got a little mist guy here. Definitely want to address that stuff. I mean, it's not a big deal if you have mist stuff, because again, we're doing another coat, but if you can get it, might as well hit it. I think Tim's making up 2 more batches. So, because again, this calls for like 6 concrete overlay counter kits. So we'll make up 2 more and we'll start doing the top, and you'll see how much easier the tops are. Again, this is a little bit more intricate, but it sure is gonna look cool when it's all done. All right, so Tim's got the product mixed up more for us, and then we're gonna start in sections. He's gonna pour out about 6 feet on this top. I'm gonna focus on the top here, this front edge. Since this is such a big area, we're gonna try to just do this whole top, overhang, the counter, all the way down kind of seamless. Now, if I was doing this by myself, I would work a little bit here, run it over the edge, jump around, right? We wanna try to continuously coat whatever section we are on. And by doing small sections like this at a time, instead of dumping it all out, it's gonna be a lot more manageable. So I'm gonna use the little guy on the top, I'm gonna hold this here when I run it down the edge, and then I'll bring the material back up. So I'm gonna get Tim some running off this edge. If I go slow, it'll usually just coat that whole edge.
Yep, it's perfect.
So I'm just slowly, if you guys push it slow over the edge, it'll kind of just coat itself. So I got him a bunch of material to work, and then I'm gonna focus on getting this section done. And then to minimize wasting product on the floor and drips, I'm gonna hold this squeegee on here, push it down, let it run over that edge, and then bring the product back up.
What I'm focusing on is just making sure that there's not a pile right up against the wall like this. I want to get that away from the wall because that's just going to start setting up. That's all I'm doing, is I'm just giving myself a little bit of freedom from the wall. I'm just running it sideways, making sure it looks pretty good. And then once the face looks pretty good, I'm just pulling back the excess a little bit, because now we can work this top without really having, see, I can kind of swoop and I don't even need to get close to that back wall anymore. Makes it very easy.
So this is moving real fast the way we're doing this, and you'll kind of see once we get the camera out here. I've already got my face coated. When I flatten it off, I'm gonna tilt it up just so it doesn't just start pushing all the product off on the floor. And then when I get to where I stopped, I'll kind of push that back onto the top. And then once I get the majority flattened off, now we have a perfectly coated face. The top's done. All I'll have to do last, I'll clean off this squeegee here, and then I'll just make sure I flatten this stuff off on the bottom. And then if there's any missed spots, I can just get a little product on that squeegee instead of pushing a bunch of product back, fill it in, flatten it off. So that's basically how we like to do counters. We work in sections, get the full thing done. Now we're gonna move on to another 6-foot section, 5-foot section. I'm gonna run material off the back for Tim, get him product, and then I'm gonna work on my front edge. And we'll show you how I did my front edge here. Take my long squeegee here, and then I'm just slapping product down, throwing it back up. Pushing that product down, throwing it back up. So you can see how fast your faces can go, and these are pretty thick faces, so not a typical countertop face here. And it's just super fast doing it like that. Then what I'll do, angle it in so it's not pushing over the edge, push that back onto the top. Get the excess product off of here. And then now I'm gonna flatten off my faces, angle that up so I'm not just dripping all over the floor. Get a little more product up here. So since we're moving so fast, Tim can start on that other counter. I can finish this up. I can even jump around, flatten off that edge. Having the right tools and technique is gonna make these projects go real fast for you. So easiest way is to, large stuff, have a big squeegee, have a smaller one, you'll have more control. Big ones are for running over edges like I am here. And then obviously flattening off, the big flat areas on the top. So I'm just getting product on this little 4-inch vertical spot, letting it drip down. So not worried about making a mess, guys. Again, we're just trying to get this stuff on where it needs to be, and then we start to clean it up, make it look nice. So I'm just going around and getting any spots that need flattened off, or maybe they're thick, or maybe it needs a little more product. So the nice thing about this first coat is it gives you experience with the product. It doesn't have to look perfect. Even if you have trowel lines or thick edges or even drips, those can be sanded out before the next coat. So it's really cool. You get to kind of learn the product before the finished coats. The second coat, a little more critical, but by then you guys will kind of know how the product works, how to trowel it out. So it's a cool first step to kind of learn the product, and I'm not worried about some of these spots like right here, right? I can sand those down. I can rub them off in a little bit of imperfections, even a miss spot, you know? So, but if you see it, try to address it. Don't worry if you guys, you know, come back the next day and you see some trowel marks or some drips or anything like that. Those can be easily sanded out. But yeah, pretty simple process. Having the right tools helps, and obviously having someone help you. This is a pretty big project, so you definitely want a few people helping you put the product down if it wasn't just a standard kitchen. So if you get too much on a counter, just run it over the edge into the bucket. And then we'll use that for the other counters. All I'm doing now is just knocking down these corners. That way I don't have to sand them. Again, it's not a big deal if you have to run a little sander over these corners, but and I'm just scraping this bottom edge off. Get those drips off. So like stuff like this, that's why I always like to walk back and look. I would want to sand that down the next day if I didn't flatten it off now. But no, I don't have to sand it. Just flatten stuff off like that. Same thing, big thick edges on the corners. Same thing, we got some thick spots here. Clean off my squeegee. And we'll just flatten that off. Got a few thick spots up here. Just flatten those off. But other than that, looks really, really good. So we got just a little bit left. We'll get this wall done here first. I'll just pour a little bit out on the floor here. And then I'll just work that up the wall. A few different ways to coat vertical walls with the roller. We're just dumping product out. And I'll show you guys maybe the next coat we do on that underhang wall over there. Maybe I'll do it like this just so you can see both ways. I'm just double checking, making sure this whole edge got coated good since they are doing an undermount sink. All right, guys, last section. Got some fresh, clean tools, some fresh overlay mix. If you haven't noticed, we always kind of work from the back to the front, right? We don't want to coat our face, then be leaning over, getting this stuff all over our pants or shorts. Scrape off these bottom edges. And I'll get some clean gloves on and I'll kind of show you guys how we can kind of mold some of these spots instead of having to sand them. So like this stuff right here, once that gets really hard, like by tomorrow, we don't want to either scrape that off, knock those chunks off, or sand them down. But if you can hit them before they get too hard, you can just brush those off without affecting the look of the coating on these faces. So that'll save a lot of time for tomorrow. We got a big chunk here, right? Just kind of knock those down. Still a little wet here, but you gotta let it set up for a little bit. Kind of some thick spots we can just flatten off. So that's the step one of the concrete counter kit. And again, I'll kind of show you guys tomorrow how to sand any imperfections. We'll let these big chunks on the faces, on these corners, we'll leave those and we'll show you how to address those. But again, if you can come back about a half an hour, hour later, rub those spots off, that's gonna save you a lot of time. We have a really thick spot here. See, it's still a little too wet. So what I could do is just grab my squeegee and flatten that off. It's gonna save you a lot of time instead of having to go around and scrape these off or sand them. So we'll show you guys step 2 tomorrow. So before we apply our second step, I wanna kind of go over a few things like I said before when we ended on the first texture coat. Any chunks and stuff that we see sticking out, we wanna kind of knock off or sand those down. So I'm just using 80 grit sandpaper. Doesn't take much. We're just trying to get any imperfections that are sticking up. Maybe on the edges, might be thick, some thick spots we'll kind of hit. Like right here, it's kind of lumped over here. Now if you have some really thick spots, you can get a palm sander. That's gonna sand it a little faster, but we don't have a lot, so I'm just gonna go around by hand and knock any of these down. And just really look, make sure there's no real thick spots like right here. Lightly hit those spots. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go around, hit any spots that are kind of thick. And I can also use my scraper, scrape stuff off. Like right here. Here's a good one. We got a nice lip overhanging there. Scrape that off. And then I'll just run the sandpaper over it. And then I always like to run it on the bottom edge as well. So when I scrape, using the scraper, I want to make sure I'm holding it flat on the surface, and it'll just shave off any thick spots. If I go in like an angle like this and not hold it flat, I'm going to wind up gouging out the edge. So make sure you hold it flat, and that'll knock down any overhang drips that are on this edge. Same thing goes if you're doing the top. Hold it flat. So again, we're just trying to knock down any high spots, thick edges, any chunks that are on the top of the counter. That way this next coat will lay out nice and flat, and we'll have less sanding before our step 3. All right, so now we'll just kind of clean up any of these chunks, vacuum them up real quick. We don't need to wipe the counter down. Just get all the chunks and the debris up, and then we'll go into the step 2 of the overlay coat. So before we go and apply our second texture coat, the second step, I wanted to go over kind of the dry time. So the first step, it's going over sealer, so the wood's not really soaking that moisture out. So you're gonna be looking at anywhere from 2 to 3 hours of dry time before you can sand or start scraping. This is typically in like a 70-degree environment. If you can get a fan on it, it's gonna dry a lot faster. If it's a warmer area, it's gonna dry faster. Obviously being colder, it'll take a little longer, but that's kind of what you can expect on your first step. And then when we do our next step, the step 2, we're going over a porous surface now because we have our first coat down. So even though we're gonna hydrate the overlay to minimize sucking the moisture out of the second step, it's still gonna do that. It's gonna wanna dry a little bit faster than the step 1. And you're probably anywhere from an hour to 2 hours before we can sand that and apply step 3. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you put fans on it, get some airflow, it's gonna dry them out even faster. But typically you can do multiple steps in one day, and you'll kind of see the dry times as far as, you know, the difference from doing the first coat to the second coat, because again, we sealed it with the primer. No moisture is being sucked out of that overlay. Now that we have a porous surface down, step 2 is gonna dry it a little faster, and then same thing with step 3. So step 3 will dry faster than all of them because it goes on a lot thinner, and we're again going over a porous surface now because we have basically a concrete profile that's unsealed. So those are kind of the dry times. Again, they can change with different temperatures, and obviously putting that fan air movement across that surface is gonna help speed that up as well. So before we start mixing step 2, I wanna go over hydration. This is a very important process because if we just coat step 2 over this dry surface, it's gonna soak all that moisture out of step 2, and it's gonna be really hard to work with. It's just gonna be a pain in the butt. So what we wanna do first, before we even start mixing, we wanna pre-hydrate the step 1. And you'll see, it'll kind of turn a darker color. We wanna basically satisfy this surface since it's so porous. That way when we do our step 2, it's not soaking any of the moisture out of the step 2 product, and we're gonna have plenty working time. So what I'm doing now is just pre-hydrating, and then we're gonna go and mix, and then we'll probably have to hydrate as we start coating. And we'll obviously show you guys that as we're doing it. We just wanna kind of minimize puddling, stuff like that. If you get too much water in an area, we can always take a rag, wipe it up. And obviously this is a relatively large counter surface, so we're using a pump up sprayer. You can just use spray bottles on smaller projects like a kitchen, but anywhere we're gonna coat, we wanna get that hydrated. And this is just cold, clean water. Notice how I'm moving relatively quick. It takes a second to soak in and look like it's dark and wet. So I don't want to just sit in one spot and spray until I see that it's darker. I want to just mist it and move on. Let that soak in, and then I can always go back and hit any dry spots that are left. So now that everything's hit, I'm gonna just go back one more time, hit any of the lighter looking dry spots. And not hit any of the really wet looking spots. So typically about now I would have Tim start mixing. That way when we're finished, the water can kind of soak in, satisfy that cement surface. And then when we're ready to coat, depending on if it's wet or dry, we'll continuously hydrate as we're coating. So Tim is gonna go start mixing for us, and then we'll start that second step. Getting ready to do step 2. When you guys are mixing step 2, you're gonna mix it the exact same way that you mix step 1. So if you have any questions on that, just revert back to that part of the video and you can watch how we mix that. So basically step 1, step 2 is mixed exactly the same, and then we're gonna apply it exactly the same also. Notice we have hydration down, and before Tim starts rolling that on the vertical surface, I'm gonna go and hydrate it one last time. Again, we don't want standing water, we don't want puddles, but we do want this surface saturated with water before we start coating. So I'll wait until he gets a decent amount done that I can get in there and I'm not getting splashed with the drips and stuff. So again, doing the same exact thing we did last time. I'm gonna pull the product up to the top, and I have a paintbrush this time, just in case I have some spots that I need to hit. It'll be a little bit easier than getting product on here and trying to push it up there. And you guys will notice we're not gonna get any of the drag or scratch marks now that we have a porous surface. So if you notice, like where Tim's coating over it, we got some of those scratches, scrape marks. We won't have any of those in this coat. So once I get this flattened off, now this is just only on step 2. We want to create a random pattern in the texture. So if I just run this straight across like that, I have to make sure I do that everywhere. Or if I have a spot where I ran it straight all the way down, and then one spot I came up at a curve, you're gonna see that spot after we do our scratch coat. So what I typically like to do to minimize, having any issues and having a cool, random, natural concrete look, get it flattened off, everything done. Pull out your bottom edge. That way we don't have a bunch of product down there. And then I'm just gonna do a random pattern. Always starting on an edge and just pulling it different directions. And that's it. Now when we do our step 3 and we seal it, we're gonna have a really cool variated pattern that's in the concrete here. It's gonna look really, really cool. Now again, there's a few different techniques you can do. Again, you can run it all straight, creates a really cool chattered effect. But this is the easiest way to make sure you don't have any spots that you forgot to chatter straight or random patterns. So just always flatten everything off, do your random pattern every direction, and then that's basically all we're doing different on this coat once we get everything flattened off. All right, everything's flattened off. Now I want to do my random pattern. And make sure you're overlapping into the last section you did, that we don't have any missed spots. Awesome. So that's kind of the process. And you'll be able to see the random texture once we get up top here also. It might be a little hard to see on this wall. And then notice Tim stopped, let me catch up. You don't want to get a bunch of product down, soaking out and drying before you can get to it, flatten it off. I don't know if you guys can see this, but these are some thin spots. It creates a really cool look if you have those randomly throughout your project. But if you want to fill those, just get a little product on there. And then just flatten it off again. I typically like to leave stuff like that because it creates a really cool natural look, but that's an easy way to fill those in if you see them. So we mixed 2 kits. So Tim's gonna take the leftover, go do a smaller section back there. That way we're not wasting any. And then once I get done here, he gets done with that one, we'll probably mix a few more kits, and then we'll start doing the tops of these, and then obviously finish on the smaller one over there. When I'm doing my final random pattern, I always try to go random directions, make sure I'm doing random directions everywhere. All right, now I'll just kind of go back and look, make sure everything's hit, there's no missed spots. It's great. Notice there's no scratch marks or tear marks in that coat. And then I can come over and take over for Tim, and he can go mix us up another few kits. All right, looks like everything is coated. So I can get the rest of this in a bucket. So we're just gonna start dumping this in the bucket instead of just throwing it all over the floor. Now what do I wanna do? I wanna make sure I get everything flattened off and I do my random pattern everywhere. All I'm doing here is just pulling down any of these thick-lipped edges. That way we don't have to sand them tomorrow. All right, so this is what I mean by, if I run this straight, I have kind of a chatter in a line pattern like this. Now, if I try to do the whole counter like that, it looks really cool. You would just have to make sure you're running it straight everywhere. But if I did that and then I had one spot where I did like a curved swoop, it's gonna show up different right there. That pattern's gonna look different when we're done. So the easiest way is just to do everything random. Pull from the edges. Just random curves everywhere. And that's gonna give us a really cool variated look once we're all done. Plastic part of the squeegee, not the actual squeegee, and we'll just scrape these off the bottom edge. So while Tim's mixing, I'm gonna hydrate again. You can tell it's already dried out in some of these spots. It's not completely dry. You can still see it still has some moisture in it, which is good. We want to saturate this surface with moisture before we start coating. You guys can kind of see this has been sitting in here for 20-30 minutes. It's getting thick. If you guys run into that, put your drill in here, mix it up, and it'll make it a lot more fluid, and I'll go mix it up and show you. All right guys, so I just went out there, ran a drill inside of here and try to get it without a shadow in there, which is gonna be almost impossible here. But now it's really fluid and runny. So just re-agitating that material, if it starts to get thick on you, just put a drill in there, spin it for a little bit, and you'll be good to go. like I said before, I always like to do the back, work towards the front. And notice we're always tapping our squeegee, getting any excess off before we come out here and like do a pass, right? So we're just constantly tapping, cleaning this off, because if we have a bunch of product on there, we're dripping out there now, we set it down, we miss a spot, right? Just kind of takes more time, so always clean it off when you're going out there, and you're not gonna be dripping everywhere or leaving lines. So got that back edge done. Now I'll focus on the faces. Okay, again, I don't want to keep doing my front edge and I'm leaning over, getting product on me. All right, got a decent sized section done. Now I want to do my random pattern. And then if you have these lips, chunkies on your front edge, just flatten those down. That'll make sanding before the step 3 go a lot faster. Now I'm going to do my random pattern. And remember, always start on an edge, come in, get a little more product up here. So I'll finish this little guy up. You guys obviously get the idea, and then we'll go show you guys doing all the tops and the walls over here on this other section. So now that we got the wall done, those 2 back counters, we're gonna focus on the rest of the tops here. And again, we're applying this the same exact way as we did before. Poured a bead out, I'm flattening off the tops, running it down the faces, and then again, very critical that we go back and we do our random pattern once we get everything cleaned up. I'm pretty much done up to this pile. Edges look good, no missed spots. So I can do my random pattern now. And when I stop out in the middle, I'm always feathering it off. I don't want to just stop and then pick it up, because what'll happen is if I stop, lift that up, now I got a line there. So feather that off, just like that. Again, just make sure we're just going different directions through the whole top here. So just like before, running some off the back edge for Tim. Get product close to my edge without running over. Now another thing I'll point out, make sure you're using your squeegee the right way. Like watch, I'll flatten this off. Now if I turn it around, it's gonna be a lot more rigid because it's always been flexing the opposite way. See how much more product I pulled? So it's gonna be a lot thinner there. So always make sure you're running that squeegee the right way. So I'm gonna finish this section and then I'm gonna hydrate a little bit more, just because we don't wanna be going on the dry first coat. We don't want it dry. It's gonna soak all the moisture out of this. We're not gonna have as much time to work with it. And it's nice too, because that first coat is kind of like your practice coat. It gets you familiar with the product, how to use the squeegee. If you have imperfections, it doesn't matter. We can sand those down like we showed you, scrape them off. Edges coated. Angle that back to keep more product from flowing over that edge. Same thing goes for these faces too. If you're gonna pull down on all of them, make sure you pull down on all of them and don't come sideways in one spot. See, now I got chatter straight up and down versus these other spots. You want to keep that in mind also. So I'm just going to make sure I just pull down on all these. Now we want to make sure I'm overlapping when I do my random pattern. And you guys will really be able to tell the random pattern after step 3. Double check, everything looks good. Got a little drip spot there we're gonna flatten off. And I'll take the plastic part of the squeegee, knock off those bottom drips. Now, like I said before, we got good hydration here. A lot of this is dried out. So what do I want to do? I want to spray some more water on it. It's going to give me more working time once I put the product over it. And I'll show you, say you spray too much, you got a big puddle there. What's going to happen is if you don't address that, we're going to pull this product over this puddle right here, and it's going to thin it out, and it's going to push all the polymer to the surface, and you're going to have like a white spot here. So make sure if you have puddles, just grab a rag, and you can wipe those up. We just don't want standing water on the surface. So any spots that are too thick, I'll just take a rag. Too much water, I'll take a rag, soak some of that up before I start pushing the material over it. And you'll notice since I poured so much out, you see how much thicker it's getting just from sitting in a big pile. Once I start moving it, it kind of agitates it and gets a little bit more fluid. But the best way is to just pour small amounts out, leave it in the bucket. If it starts getting thick, put a drill in that bucket, re-agitate it, and it's gonna be a lot more easier to work with, more fluid. So you guys pretty much get the idea of what I'm doing here, so we'll go around and show you some footage of what Tim's doing, going around the undermount sink cutout, stuff like that. So, looks like we got a chunk that was missed. Something maybe fell into it when it was wet. Want to scrape those chunks out, get them flat before we coat over that. All right, guys, so I told you I'd show you pulling up from the bottom, coating the wall versus letting it run down. So what I'm gonna do, I'll start and get this little section done here. Pour a little bit out down here. Now, obviously, if you're gonna do this, you're gonna wanna make sure you can put some cardboard down and pour it on the cardboard. That'd probably be the best way to do it. Just get a pile down there and then just start bringing it up to the top. And once we get it all coated, we can work that back down. All this looks random, right? If I just went sideways or something, it's gonna, maybe if I go up, I guess it's all gonna look random here. Just be conscious of if you have like the straight line chatter versus a random look like this. Looks really good, matches that front edge, so I think we're good there. And then again, make sure you pull out your product away from your wall. You don't want a bunch of big puddles there that are gonna dry and get hard. It's gonna be a pain in the butt to cut those out. Flatten off our bottom edge. Get these drips that just hit. Now we can move on to this bigger wall here. So again, it's real thick. I can just kind of agitate that. Or we can put a drill in it. Gonna get a little bit more out here. Kind of move this around, agitate it so it thins it out. Now all we gotta do, push it up to the wall, start bringing it up. And I like to feather it off, because if I have a lot of product from pulling it up, and I just stop here and let go, all that's gonna come off the trowel, hit the floor, and wanna splatter. So we'll just keep running it around the wall until we get everything coated. Pour a little bit more out. Always make sure you're pulling that product away from your finished edge down here. If we don't scrape those off, we're gonna wind up having to sand them off, so run that plastic part of the squeegee on there. And then if I see any spots on these edges, clean this squeegee off. Flatten these off. All right guys, so that was step 2. We'll let this dry out. And again, we're gonna go over it real quick, make sure there's no chunks, any spots. But we typically like to check every section. So do a section, go back, look, because you wanna hit it when it's still wet. Some of this stuff is dry, we probably won't hit it if we see anything, but other than that, we're gonna let this set up. Again, this coat will dry a little faster since it has that first step, soaking the moisture out. And if we wanna dry it even faster, throw a fan on it, but typically we're about 1 hour to 2 hours before we can start sanding, getting it ready for that step 3. And I can see a spot right here, maybe the trowel hit. I wanna just kind of flatten that off so it doesn't have a line there. But yeah, this looks perfect. Gonna look really, really cool now that we have that random pattern in the surface from doing random directions. It's gonna give it a really natural cement look when we're done. So before we start sanding, after step 2, I wanna kind of go over the tools you'll need. Palm sander, a vacuum. We like to attach a vacuum to the palm sanders to minimize the dust. We'll start out without wearing a mask, maybe doing the underneath here, the walls, we might create a little dust. If we start creating dust, we're gonna put our masks on. I'm gonna be wearing some ear protection. And then if you come closer here, we're gonna be using 80 grit for the tops, the faces. I'm not gonna use the palm sander on the corners unless I switch to a 320 grit. So you wanna use a really fine sandpaper on your corners, and I don't even recommend really sanding these with the palm sander. Just do them by hand, that way you don't sand through all the way. But I'll kind of show you, if you are gonna use a palm sander, how to do it. But again, the best way to do it is just get the tops done, your faces, and then just run some sandpaper with your hand and do your edges. And then when you're hooking your palm sander up to the sanding pad, try to make sure most of these ports are opened up. That way it can suck the dust out. So what I'll do is we're gonna be using the 80 grit, getting the top, right, the faces, any flat surfaces with 80 grit, and then anything else we'll do the 320 grit where we wanna be a little more careful and not sand through as much. But real simple, I'll kind of show you the process of how we do it. And all we're trying to do is knock down all the chatter. So it has a lot of chatter, rough stuff from the crushed marble in the mix. And if I take a metal trowel and if I just scratch it over it like this, it just sounds really rough. Once we sand this, it'll be a lot smoother. And then when we do our step 3, it's gonna fill in all the low spots. The metal scraper is gonna run on all the flat spots, the high spots. Step 3 is gonna fill all those in, and you'll see that when we get to that point. But it's very vital to sand before your step 3, and obviously the better you sand, the flatter you can get it, the nicer your counters are gonna look. So sanded a small section, doesn't really make a chattery noise. So big difference, once it's sanded, it's nice flat surface versus unsanded. If you try to do your step 3 without sanding, you're gonna have a chatter. It's not gonna be nice and smooth, so make sure you guys are sanding good. And again, the better you sand, the flatter these tops are gonna look. Okay, so next step is once we get the top done, the face done, now we gotta do our corners. And I'm gonna show you how to do that. I'm gonna put the 320 grit on the palm sander and just lightly hit it, moving quickly. And then I'm gonna take it off and then run it with my hand to kind of round that edge. And that'll give us a really nice rounded edge. Again, if you're using the palm sander, you wanna be real careful that you don't sand all the way through. And if you do, the next coat, we can fill that. But again, we just wanna minimize having to, repair or patch any spots like that. So we'll swap out the grit to the 320, line these holes up, and then I'll show you how I do it. You can see how fast I was moving. You never want to stand in one spot too long. So I'm constantly moving, checking, making sure I'm not going through. And then once we do that, we're going to take the 320 grit, fold it over, just make that a nice rounded edge. Now you can see how nice of a rounded edge we have. Looks like without even doing our next coat, it's nice and smooth. Looks like it was actually a poured edge here. Very, very cool. So that's how you do your edges. Now I do want to point out, corners, stuff like this, you want to be real careful. If you're going to do the palm sander, again, if you guys haven't done a palm sander very much, you're not familiar with it, just do your edges by hand. It'll take a little longer, but you're not going to run sand through, and definitely don't use them on your corners. These will sand through really, really easy. So I'll always do these by hand. And it doesn't take much. We're using a really fine sandpaper, and that corner's done, nice and smooth. So you can see how nice and smooth it is compared to where we haven't done anything, and then we have this nice edge finished. So that's how you do your edges. Fairly simple, goes pretty quick. Now, the longer you let that second coat sit, like we did this Friday, and then we let it sit over the weekend, so the longer this stuff cures, the harder it's gonna be to sand. So it is a lot harder to sand than it would be like if we waited 2 hours and let it dry and then sand. It's gonna sand a little bit easier. So keep that in mind. The longer this is sitting there before you start sanding, the harder it is to sand, because it's 7 days fully cured. After 7 days, this product is as hard as it's gonna get. So the longer it waits before you sand, the harder it is gonna be to sand. You might even use a 40 grit sandpaper on the top. So we might even switch to a 40 grit just for the tops to buzz through that real quick to get it flat. And then faces as well. And then again, guys, corners, make sure you're using a finer grit, 320, 220, something really fine so you're not sanding through as fast, and you can kind of mold it a lot better. So we'll kind of keep going here. We'll show you some more shots, but sanding is relatively simple, easy to do. And then once we get done with sanding, we're gonna clean the counters, and then we're gonna go into our step 3, which is the scratch coat, and that's gonna fill in all our low spots in the countertop. And a good way to make sure you've sanded everything is you can just take a scraper. We're gonna be using these for the step 3, and just run it on the counter. If you hear any chatter, right? If you hear any chatter, you might want to sand those spots a little more, and this is what the chatter sounds like. So that's really rough. So that's unsanded versus sanded. So you can kind of run your scraper on it real quick, see if you have any spots that maybe were missed. But as long as you guys are working in sections at a time, notice how I would do a section in the face, section on the top, then the face. You typically shouldn't miss any spots. Instead of trying to just do the whole thing at once, just work in small sections, make sure you hit everywhere, move on to another section. All right, so I'll kind of walk through if you're doing an undermount sink. So obviously we want to get this edge smooth, finished looking. So what I'll do is I'll sand the top, get the top sanded, and then we'll sand underneath here because we have some drips. And then I'll take the sander, right? I'm gonna sand these flat edges as much as I can, and then obviously these round ones, we'll go to a finer grit when we get into anything we're doing like corners or angles. And then the same thing with our edges I showed you out there. We're gonna do these by hand as well. So I'll kind of show you what that looks like. Okay, so undermount sinks, that's how you do it. Now obviously we went through a little bit right here. Palm sander, like I said, you gotta be real careful when you're doing these faces and corners with the palm sander. We can touch that up with the next coat, so I'm not worried about it. But palm sand your main spots down, and then we went to 80 grit by hand, right? Got in these corners, softened the top edges up, and then I took the 220, 320 and kind of molded these top corners with that really fine grit. That way we didn't go through a lot. So undermount sinks, make sure you get your bottom edges smoothed off like I did. Get them as flat as you can, and then these are basically ready to go. So that's how we'll do all the undermount sinks, and then I'll go show you guys kind of how to do the walls. and then we'll get this thing finished up. So another thing we want to hit on is some spots you're going to want to retape. If the material builds up too much on the tape, like we went around, I'll kind of show you right here. We had the contractor go around, pull up all the paper we had here and the tape, retape this. Same thing without here. We had a lot of buildup material on there. The thicker it gets, the harder it is to get it up. You have to cut it out. So we had him pull that, retape it. So now when we do our final coat, it's gonna be easy to clean up, pull the tape. We're not gonna have to cut a bunch of stuff out. And then the other thing is some spots on your backsplashes, on your edges. So over here, you can see over here, we've pulled the tape. We had a lot of buildup of material in these spots, cut it out, pulled the tape. We're gonna retape these. We're gonna retape right here. We're gonna retape up there. And then I'll kind of show you what to do when you pull the tape so you can see how thick the material is here. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pull up to that edge, and we can pull that off, and then we can retape this. We might even want to pull that first layer of tape. Some spots you'll need a scraper to get under. So you can see how nice of an edge that left us. So we'll retape that one more time, and then when we do our last coat, it's gonna pull really easy. We're gonna have a nice finished edge. So we're just going around, getting those spots dialed in, retaping any of those spots. We'll finish sanding. We'll show you guys how to clean up after sanding, and then we'll go into the step 3 coat. So what Tim's doing right now is we want to basically separate these sections so it's easier to manage step 3. So we can just focus on the top here, coat this face, and we can basically end right here. And then when we get that whole area done, we can pull the tape and then coat this, faces, and work on these back two. So it's going to make it a lot easier when you have large projects like this to kind of split it up. Right, we can regroup after that. If we need to make more, we can make more. So simple way, we're gonna tape that edge, and then we're gonna put some paper or plastic down a little bit, That way we have more room for material to run off, and then we're ready to go. Pull that up and we can start coating down here. So what we want to do next, we've already cleaned where we're going to tape, but we want to clean basically everything off. So I'm going to spray water because we got to hydrate anyways. We're going to wipe it off with rags. I'm not going to spray water on the tape. Obviously when the water hits that tape, it's going to not want to stick good. So when we're hydrating this face as we're coating, we'll probably just use a damp rag, wet rag, and we'll rub that on there to hydrate this instead of spraying it, getting water down on the tape. But I can spray close to the tape and we can start cleaning it. Now we've already vacuumed it after sanding. We just want to do a quick wipe on it. Now since we're wiping with the rag, I can spray as much water as I want. I'm not worried about puddling because we're just going to wipe it all up. You guys can really see the pattern now, how all this pattern is just going random directions. That's why we wanted to make sure on step 2, once we're done, we do those random passes. So that's what gives you this cool, really cool look. We're gonna clean all the counters right now. Just using water, cold water. Notice once that water hits it, it really shows that pattern, really beautiful. And again, I'm just soaking it because we have to hydrate it anyways. And we're gonna wipe it off with the rag. So I'm just gonna finish up cleaning these, get them all ready, soak them, wipe them up, clean them off good, and then when we go to apply that step 3, we're gonna wanna hydrate again, but again, we're not gonna soak it, we're gonna mist it. Just make sure we have the surface saturated so it's not sucking the moisture out of step 3. So we'll finish this up and then we'll go into mixing step 3.
I want to show you how to mix step 3. Now I'm just going to mix one batch, although we're probably going to mix 2 batches at a time. The first thing you want to do is shake up the liquid polymer, just like steps 1 and 2. It's pretty much the same as steps 1 and 2, just a little bit different mix we're using. Pour it into a mixing container. And just like when we mixed step 1 and 2, I'm gonna keep the drill on while I'm dumping it in. To get all of it out of the bag now. You want to mix it for a couple minutes. Now we're going to add our liquid modifier. It's a very small amount of liquid modifier. You can actually add this to the liquid polymer before you add the powder. We're just going to add it right now. That's kind of the consistency we're going for. Right there, maybe even a little bit thicker is fine. And now, we'll go in and put this down.
So we're getting ready to apply the step 3. While they were out there mixing, I was in here pre-hydrating. Everywhere we're gonna coat, it's always good to pre-hydrate before, get that surface saturated with water so it's not porous and wanting to soak the moisture out of our concrete overlay. So Tim's gonna roll it underneath here. We're gonna do the underneath on this, and then I'm just gonna take the magic trowel and flatten it off. Now, we're gonna be applying the rest using a steel trowel to flatten it off, but we wanna leave some behind. So the squeegee will leave it a little thicker under there, which is gonna help. So So I'm gonna flatten that off with the squeegee, and then when we get to the walls and everything else, we're gonna switch to the metal scraper, metal blades, and you'll kind of see how that works. And we're just using a roller tray, 3/8 snap roller. So we're applying the step 3 now. While they were out there mixing step 3, I was in here pre-hydrating the surface. As you can see, it's all kind of wet looking in spots. It's always good to pre-hydrate, get the surface satisfied with water so it's not sucking the moisture out of our concrete overlay. So Tim's gonna roll on our step 3 underneath here. Again, we just wanna make it look like concrete. If you look under there, it'll all still look like one solid slab of concrete. So he's just rolling that on. It's basically, looks just like it was painted, but it has that concrete look to it, so it's awesome. And then one more thing I want to point out is if you guys are doing projects like this, especially contractors, maybe even a homeowner, it's always good to do sample boards because you're already coating anyways. Have a board ready, coat it every step, and then you can take that and showcase that to other customers. Or if you're a homeowner doing this on your house, you can make the sample board, and if you're doing maybe one of our stains, because we do have stain options for these, you could practice on that before you do your counter. So we have the board right here, and I'll just coat this while Tim's doing that, and then I'll show you guys some stain options maybe tomorrow. Even though we're not gonna stain this counter, we wanna leave it just gray, natural gray. At least you guys can kind of see some of the options. So this stuff goes really far. And actually, we'll get behind Tim so he's not in his way here. So notice how it's filling in all the low spots and giving us a nice, smooth concrete look. Now we have a board that we can either test stains on, or again, contractors, you can take that to another project. We can seal that tomorrow when we seal the counters. Might as well, if you're already coating, have the product mixed up, have a couple boards laying around, do some samples while you're doing the actual project. All right, guys, so we're doing it on the wall. Tim's applying it in front of me with that roller, and I'm just scratching it as tight as I can, and you can see how cool that looks once we have it filled in. And before I move on too far, I want to make sure everything's filled. Like, we got some open spots here, which again, it's really cool to leave random stuff like that because concrete's not perfect, especially walls. But if you want to fill those in, get a little product there, and then flatten it off.
Looks so good.
I'm always constantly checking back before I move on. Make sure there's no spots I want to hit, fill in. And then Tim's just not getting too far ahead. And if I need more material, I'll just let him know, he'll give me more. And then same thing we did before, guys. We don't want to get too far. We want to clean off this bottom edge. And then don't worry if you come back and you see a spot that maybe needed knocked off or something, we can always sand those down too. Voila. So now what I'll do is I'll just go around, look at any spots like right here on this bottom edge that ain't gonna look good. Just flatten those off. So there's basically the hardest parts on here. Tim's finishing up that batch that we had made. And then we can kind of regroup, make some more, and we can start on the top here. So while Tim's doing the top, I'm gonna focus on the undermount sink area. And we wanna leave it on a little thicker, so I'm gonna use a squeegee instead of a scraper just around that inside cutout for the undermount sink. And then notice Tim's leaving some of these edges kind of thick. They're real thick. That's okay. It's actually better to do that. And then we can come back here and probably by the time we're done, we can start molding this with our hand and gloves, and it'll create a really natural looking edge. So don't worry if you have thick spots. It's actually, like I said, better to leave a little product there. We can come back and mold that in before it gets too hard, and we'll obviously show you that when we get to that point. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna flatten these off inside here, and you can see how nice of a seal that makes using the squeegee versus that metal scraper. Just leaves it on a little bit thicker. That's gonna look really nice when the sinks are in there. And again, guys, we can always sand any imperfections out before we do our top coat. So that edge looks good, so he can kind of clean up the lip that I left there. And that sink's pretty much done. So before we start on these, we want to hydrate. Just finally do a fine mist everywhere. And if you get too much, it starts puddling up, just take a rag and wipe it off. And what I'm gonna do, just to kind of speed this up, just kind of spray a lot, and I'm gonna grab a rag, wipe it off, instead of just spraying multiple thin coats on it. Just wanna make sure we're not going on really watery surfaces, because it's gonna thin out that step thin material, and it can turn white in those spots as well. And then what I'll do while Tim's coating this is I'll start pre-hydrating that top where we're gonna be going next. And it's the same thing with the step 1 and 2. If this starts getting thick on you, re-agitate it with the drill, shake it around, stir stick in it, mix it, and it'll make it a lot more fluid for you. So guys, all I'm doing here is just knocking down the thick spots that were pushed down after Tim flattened it off. Because when I coated this edge, I knocked some chunks on the top. And stuff like this, don't even worry about it. Just leave it. We can sand that, we can rub that out once it starts to set up. It's a really forgiving product as far as how perfect it looks. I mean, look, we got big chunks, thick spots on our edges. Totally fine. Not worried about it. I'll come back, I'll mold that edge, make it look really nice. And if you have, see how chunky that's getting? Scrape that off and get some fresh stuff out there. It'll make life a lot easier for you. And so the longer your pile sits out there, the faster it's gonna set up. It's gonna sit in the bucket a lot longer. So pour smaller beads out more frequently, and then you won't really run into a lot of that setting up on you. Grab this bottom edge in so get rid of our drips. And then once that sets up, I can kind of mold in these thick spots, just like we're gonna out here. So we're good. So these are pretty much done, and you can see the variation. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but you'll be able to see better once it's sealed. Really cool variation we have out here from going random patterns with that step 2 in the squeegee. And then once these kind of dry out, I'll come back, I'll knock these chunks off, I'll start molding these corners, molding that bottom edge. It's gonna look really, really good. So we'll go mix up some more, and then we're gonna start up top, focus on the top, get this face done, get this waterfall edge done, and then get this inside edge done, pull this plastic tape, and then we just have to finish out this bottom counter, which is gonna be real simple. All right, so we just mixed up another batch, and I'm gonna pre-hydrate again. I'm just gonna soak it, wipe it down with the rag. That's really the fastest way to do it. You just wanna, again, make sure we don't have standing water, puddles, stuff like that. So I'm gonna be working on this side. Tim will be on the other side working on that other face, since it's a seamless pour we have going on here. And then since I don't wanna soak that tape, pump this up good. And then I'll make it a fine mist. Try not to hit that tape. Notice Tim's wiping down all the thick spots of water. We're basically gonna be ready to start applying that here. So since we have 2 people, again, projects like this, make sure you guys have enough people to help. I could do this by myself. I would just kind of have to run side to side, right? I wanna coat all the way down, work my way off. I don't wanna just coat and having a bead out here that's gonna dry. That's why we have the tape down there. That's kind of our stopping point. And then you'll notice, like right here, we sanded through to the wood. Not a big deal at all, because I'm gonna leave my edge a little thick there. And then when I mold that end, I'm gonna make it to where I don't have to sand that, and that'll be covered completely. So any spots that you've sanded through, try to leave it a little chunky there, a little thick, and then we can mold that in, and I'll show you guys that process after it starts to set up a little bit. So again, let's pour out, I want to pour out some smaller beads, because this goes relatively far. We can pour out multiple ones instead of pouring out a big pile that's just gonna sit there and start soaking in and drying out on us. So I'm gonna do the same thing we did on our first 2 coats. Start running product down this edge for Tim, and he'll tell me if he needs more or less. And then I wanna do my face here last. I don't wanna be coating my face and then working over, getting it on my shirt. So I'll get the top done and then I'll do my face. And we're applying pressure and just scratching it as tight as it'll go. So an easy way to clean up your thick spots on your edges, run a paintbrush on that. That'll get all that excess up. And then just flatten it off. So top's done, now I can work on my face here. And then we just continue that process all the way down the counters. Notice I kind of hit my edge, and I'll pull that back up instead of letting it drip and splash on the floor. And then if we need to rehydrate, I can do a fine mist, which is going to give us a little more working time. Once that material's out, and kind of see the tops kind of drying out on us. I'm not going to soak it now, just a fine mist. Notice we're always cleaning off our trowels as well. We don't let a bunch of buildup get on there. We're always flattening those off right where we're going to be coating next. And again, I'm not worried about a thick edge on our corners. It's actually better to leave that and then come back and mold it in. All right, guys, wall time. So what I'm gonna do, hold my trowel down here, dump a little on it, and just start pulling that up. So again, you can do the roller technique, or you can do it like this. Both are relatively simple. Awesome, so I'm just always looking for any imperfections and missed spots, making sure everything got hit. Now that this has kind of got set up a little, I can probably flatten this off a little nicer. And then what I'll do is I'll take my paintbrush and I'll brush in this bottom edge after I pull the excess away. So while Tim cleans up our trowels, this is probably ready to be kind of molded in. And so we got this chunk here, right? I just told you to leave it. Oh, what? Just knock it right off. Same thing here. Knock it right off. And then what I'm gonna do is start molding any of these thick spots in. Now, if it just starts smearing, it's a little too early. Let it sit a little bit longer. But watch how nice I can make these look just from molding those on before it gets too hard. We have a nice finished undermount sink area. Now I'm going to do these faces. So look, we got a trowel line here. I can just rub that out. Gone. Another one here. Another one here, just rub them out. So, very forgiving product as far as being able to shape it, not having it perfect right when you're coating. I mean, look how nice these edges look now. Look like they were poured in a form. And we didn't try to shape those at all. We just scratched the top, scratched the face, left it thick there, and I just kind of came and molded that in with my hand. Now we got a nice perfect edge. And like you can tell, like right here where we just finished, it has that wet look. If I try to mold that, it's just gonna smear it. If we come back over here where we started on these counters, I can probably, like here's that spot I was telling you about. See the difference? I can just rub that in and it'll just disappear. Same thing with right here. So it's just hitting it at the right time, rubbing it out. These are a little wet, so I'm gonna be nice and light on them. Got a line right here. I'm gonna rub out, hit this bottom edge. So if it starts gumming up and stuff, just let it sit a little bit longer. So this is still a little too wet. So we'll let this sit, finish up these tops, and then I can come and hit these. You can see how much this soaks up the moisture from spraying water. So imagine not hydrating and having all the moisture sucked out of that material. Is just gonna make it really thick paste and basically unworkable. So I don't wanna hit the back, so I'm gonna get it close. And then I'll work it up there by getting product on the trowel. And then I'm gonna take that paintbrush and brush in this edge. The product started to tear there because it's drying out. So what I'm gonna do, just grab some fresh material, put it over that spot, blend it in, and then when you scratch over it, it gets rid of that tear mark. So what I can do now that everything's done, obviously where we just finished, that's gonna have to set up a little more before we rub it. So we'll just let that set up and we'll show you how to lightly sand those spots. But before I leave, I wanna hit any of these areas that I can to minimize any sanding that I'll have. So again, just run your hand nice and light. So we'll come back tomorrow. We'll show you sanding any spots out that we want to hit, the edges, anything on the top, and then we'll show you how to apply our top coat. We're going to be using our matte urethane with the grit additive. All right, guys, so this step 3 is dry. Now we can kind of fine tune, sand out any imperfections, make our edges really nice. I'm going to be using 220 grit. You can also use 320. Make sure you're using a higher grit. That way you're not sanding through faster. We want to be real careful on these corners. Again, I suggest sanding those by hand. Now, if you have some spots like right over here that are really thick, right? You could hit those and then sand by hand, get that kind of sanded down a little, then sand by hand. So a lot of this I will sand by hand. I'm going to go around, hit any thicker spots, any spots that are thick that's going to take longer to sand by hand. Kind of sand those down a little, and then I'll get the sanding pad off, and I'll just use my hand. But I'll kind of show you what that looks like. Again, we're hooked up to a vacuum palm sander. So just kind of fine tuning these spots. Like right here, we got a spot that's raised up there. I'll palm sand that out. Relatively easy to fine tune your corners. Now we have these nice rounded corners that look like they were poured in a form. Very, very cool. I'll hit this bottom edge, just kind of go around. Like we got spots here that are really thick, right? Trying to sand that by hand would take a while. And again, if you guys haven't used a palm sander a lot, sand it down flat. And then when you're kind of rounding your edges, just do that by hand. Take your sandpaper off, and you can kind of just round that corner really nice, and you're not going to run the chance of like sanding through. So I would recommend palm sanding the big spots down, get them relatively flat, taking that sandpaper off, molding that with your hand. That way you're not sanding through. So I'll get a new pad on here. Take that sandpaper off. Now we're just gonna, you can see how square this edge is just by sanding that a little bit. And I'm gonna get it close to how I want it. See how that'll take a lot more off. Now I don't wanna sand 80 grit on the finish, right? But the edge, you're not gonna notice any scratches. Plus I'm gonna come back with that 220 and finish it off. But this will help around that corner a little bit better, a little faster. So last thing I'll show you guys, and then we'll kind of finish sanding any spots out we want, is you can hit your bottom edge as well. I'm gonna use the 80 grit. That'll clean up that bottom edge as well. And then if you have any, thick, chunky spots down there, throw the 80 grit, 40 grit on a palm sander, just hold that flat, and you'll be able to sand those completely smooth, but it's really flat under here, feels nice. So that's pretty much it. So those are kind of the things you might want to do before you apply your top coat. So we'll get this all finished up. Any spots sanded down we want to hit, obviously like chunks like this on the edge, we're going to address, sand those down, round them, and then we'll show you guys how to apply the urethane top coat.
We're gonna mix up the WB matte urethane with grit. So you need the water, 2 ounces per set. Now with the concrete overlay countertop kits, it'll come with 2 sets. So we're going to mix up 4, essentially 2 kits at a time. So we have our A's, we have our B's, and for every one of these partners here, it's 2 ounces of water. And since we're mixing up 4 of them, we need 8 ounces of water. I have that water right here. So we're gonna mix the part A and the part B together like we always do. Then we'll add the grit additive slowly and then the water. So the first thing we wanna do, and it even says must mix with part B. Once mixed, blend in 2 ounces of clean water. One thing we like to do is pour in some water into the containers just to get everything out of them that we can. What I'm gonna pour just a little bit of this water. Now remember, we need to add this water into the mix anyways, so we're just gonna pour it in these containers first just to rinse them out a little bit. Pour a little bit of water in there. And we'll put the lids back on, give them a little bit of a shake. And you'll be able to see, even with this one, that it gets a lot of the mix out. See how white that looks? So it's nice. We definitely want to do that. All right, now we have all the part A mix in there in this container. So now we want to do the same thing with the B's. And the B is pretty thick as well. So we want to do the same thing with the rest of this water. So we want to stir this together. You can use a mixer, an electric drill with a paddle wheel on it, a paddle mixer. We're just gonna do it by hand. It blends together really easily. That's kind of the nature of waterborne products, is they mix very easily. Once we've mixed it for about a minute, minute and a half, we'll start to add the grit additive. If you do mix it, just mix it on a low RPM. You don't need to go really fast. Just make sure you scrape the sides a bunch, the bottom. All right, I'm gonna open up these bags. We have a thick enough mix where you can mix a couple of the bags at a time. You can just put them on top, blend those in, and then add the 2 other bags. Once you add the grit additive in, mix it for a couple more minutes. And it's definitely a lot easier when you're doing this much volume and you're adding and you have the grit additive to use an electric drill. So I do recommend an electric drill if you're mixing this much up, especially with the grit additive. Okay, now I've got it mixed pretty thoroughly. I'm just gonna put this paddle wheel in a little bit just to make sure there's no chunks or any of the grit additive that still needs to be mixed. All right, now this is ready to go and we'll start rolling it out.
So now that we've got the counters sanded, any imperfections taken out, we've cleaned them, we wiped them off, and we just wiped them with a dry rag. We don't want to get some moisture in here before we do our urethane. So vacuumed them, wiped them off with the dry rag, and now we're gonna apply our urethane. So what we're gonna do, I'm gonna focus on the top here, this face. Tim's gonna do the back edge down there, and then when we're all done, we'll come and do the wall under here, and then underneath the counter edge here. We're gonna be using 3/8 snap roller. I've already de-shedded it, pulled some tape out, ran that on the tape to pull any loose hairs, fibers off. We're gonna be using the 9-inch roller. Smaller counters, kitchen counters, we like to use a 6-inch roller, same thing, 3/8 snap, and then a roller tray. That way we can get even amount everywhere from dipping it in here. Paintbrush for our edges. So I'm gonna get my edges real quick. Anywhere that I know that roller's not gonna be able to hit, try to come out an inch or so. Always like to take a second, soak up the roller tray, the roller. Make sure we get it nice and saturated with the urethane. And keep in mind, this is gonna go relatively far on this top with the 9-inch roller. So I'll roll a bead down the middle, and then I'm just gonna cross roll. And then just some final back rolls, make sure I don't have any thick roller lines, thick edges anywhere. And then when I do my next section, I wanna make sure I'm overlapping into that first section. So I'll get a decent amount done on the top, and I'm gonna roll my face. Make sure we hit that corner. I'm gonna flatten that roller off after I hit that corner. It's gonna leave an indent, and then I'll do my back roll. And that back roll is just trying to get rid of any roller edges, thick spots. It's always good once you get done with the section just to go back, make sure you don't have any missed spots. But since this overlay is so porous, it's gonna soak up this first coat quite a bit, and that's why we do 2 coats. So once this first coat's done, it's basically gonna seal that surface from soaking up the second coat. Second coat's gonna go a lot farther. It'll be a little bit faster when we apply it. But the main spots, people have maybe dry spots or missed spots, this front edge, and then typically on their faces towards an edge or the top there. So just double check those. Just make sure you're rolling it out good. It's designed to go on relatively thin. And notice how I'm only doing 3-4 foot sections at a time. Tim's doing the same thing. We're not trying to do the whole counter at once and then hit our edges. You can see after I roll that corner, messes up the roller. So if I started to just do my back roll, I would leave a kind of a weird line there. So I always like to flatten that roller off before I do my back roll. So don't want to run that roller on the ground, obviously, with all the dust and debris. So I'm just going to brush these bottom edges in and then just roll right close to those without hitting the ground. And then we're going to just do the wall like we would the counter, roll kind of down the middle, and then cross roll that. Again, I'm checking for thick roller lines, missed spots. So when you guys are cutting in, we want to make sure we're not cutting in this whole top and then rolling it. We want to cut in the section we're going to roll and then cut in another section, because what will happen is this dries relatively quickly, and if you try to coat your whole counter edges, by the time you get to, you know, some that you did later on in that process, it's almost gonna be like you're doing 2 coats in that area. So we always like to just cut in where we're gonna roll that first section, roll it, move on to the next one, cut that in, and then roll that out. And I always like to work from the back to the front. So we're applying our second coat now of the urethane top coat, and as you can see, it's not completely dry, but doesn't have that milky white color to it, and we can set stuff on it. I wouldn't recommend dragging your trays on it, stuff like that, but simply set it down and we can start applying our second coat. Now we recommend to wait anywhere from a half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe even an hour before you apply that second coat, because as you can see, this is where we finished our first coat, and you can still see some milky white spots. So you definitely wouldn't want to coat your second coat over that. Once everything goes dull and kind of a dry look, you can apply that second coat. Now, if you want to speed up that process, you can also put a fan on it, get some airflow. It's going to dry out that urethane even faster. So we're going to apply it the same exact way, dip and roll, cut in our edges, and again, just the same exact way that we did that first coat. We're going to apply that second coat. Just keep in mind, it is going to go a little bit farther now that the first coat's kind of sealed up that concrete overlay. And if you guys ever have to stop, say out in the middle or something, you never want to just stop and pick it up. We always want to kind of feather that off. Just feather that off if you have to stop anywhere in the middle of the counter or on an edge. Notice too, after I dip in the roller tray, if I'm doing like a 4-foot section, I'll start in the middle and push it, kind of roll that, all the material out that's on the roller. If I dip in the roller and I start right here, I'm gonna have a lot of material right there, then I'm gonna have to try to push all the way to the end there. Start in the middle, roll that out, and then do your cross roll. All right, so that's how you apply the second coat, same way as the first coat of the urethane top coat. Now this will be tack free in about 4 to 6 hours. You want to wait at least 24 to 48 hours before you guys are actually setting stuff on it, and then full cure is 7 days. So anywhere in between that time, after 7 days, it's not going to get any harder. So at its hardest point, 7 days after application. Same thing with the concrete overlay. So we typically want to tell you guys to wait about 48 hours before you start full use on your kitchen. Everything should be hot, dry, hard, but again, it's at its hardest point at 7 days. So we'll finish this up and then get everything cleaned up, and then when they finish this building, we'll come back, throw the after footage in here for you guys because it's going to look absolutely beautiful.